Okay, everybody, this one is exciting. We have Tom Fegan with us, and he's running for the Iowa Senate seat that is now occupied by Senator Grassley. This is a real progressive we've got here who's an important candidate. I'm really excited to introduce you. I myself have heard Tom speak, and I went, whoa, who is that? What is that? So it's really, really wonderful to present him to you here. Tom Fegan, welcome.
Thank you, Marianne.
You know, Tom, I heard you talk. It was at a Democratic dinner, I think, in Iowa, and you were talking about your own experience with some of the frustrations that people expressed to you about the government, and about how there was the feeling, even among Democrats, that the Democrats didn't seem to be really standing up for them any more than the Republicans were. So I think of you as someone who is a leader, is a leading voice in the political revolution within the Democratic Party that is occurring simultaneously to this larger revolution against established voices in the country. Wouldn't you say that that's correct?
I would, Marianne. Too many working people do not believe that either party speaks for them. And I had an experience in the fall of 2015 where I went on what was called a farm crawl to visit organic farmers. And I went on to one of these farmers' property. I got out of my truck, and he came out of his shed, and he F-bombed me. And I'll only tell you the farmer's first name. His name was Michael. And Michael came out and said, "You effing Democrats." And we're out in the middle of nowhere, so I'm worried they're going to find me buried in a field. So I held my hands up and said, "Hey, what did I do? What did we do?" And Michael said, "You Democrats, you tell us, farmers, us working people, you're with us until Monsanto calls and wants something, or until Cargill calls and wants something." He said, "I'm tired of having my heart broken and being betrayed by Democrats." Michael said, "I get it that the Republicans favor the rich people," but he said, "We no longer believe that the Democrats stand with us." And one of the things that I've taken from that is that Democrats this year, progressives, need to demonstrate unconditional loyalty with working people.
Tom, that story moved me the first time I heard you say it, and it just moved me again, and it only increases my sense that we need voices such as yours in the U.S. Senate, and we also need voices such as yours taking the Democratic Party back to its soul. And I know that this fire was lit in you long before you met Michael, and that there was something in your own past and with your own parents and experiencing in your own family some of the economic injustice that comes about when banks and other institutional forces have too much power and corrupt the democratic process and work against the interests of the real people of the United States. Tell us the story about your own family.
In the 80s, when I finished my undergraduate degree, I wanted to go back to the farm. And I had a sit-down meeting with my mom and my dad and said, "Can I come back and farm?" And at the time, Marianne, they had over $1 million borrowed, and they were paying 23% interest on their farm loans. And they said, to be honest, we don't know how much longer we can hang on. And at that point, I decided if I couldn't be a farmer, I wanted to be a farmer's lawyer. And I applied to law schools, and I was accepted into law school at the University of Iowa. And interestingly enough, at the end of my first semester, I called home before starting to study for finals, and my parents had gotten what we call in the business a drop-dead letter from their bank. And the drop-dead letter told them they had 60 days to pay back all of their loans, including the mortgage. And at the same time, on the same day, they got a second registered letter, Marianne, that froze their bank account. And the bank informed them that it wouldn't let them buy feed for the animals, wouldn't let them buy fuel for the tractors, it wouldn't even let them pay their electric bill and buy groceries. And when I finished with finals, I went home, and my little brothers and sisters told me that mom and dad hadn't slept for 10 days, and they literally didn't know how they were going to survive. And this was over Christmas, and we really didn't have a Christmas that year. We were living out of vegetables that my mom had canned. My parents literally did not know how they were going to pay for electricity. And how they got through that winter is we had some very good neighbors that instead of moving their own snow with their tractor, they hired my dad to move snow, and they paid him in cash. And they had other things that they had him do, and my folks literally lived that winter out of cash that my mom kept in a coffee can. Congress doesn't regulate Wall Street. Wall Street regulates the Congress.
And the banks regulate the Congress. So you have endorsed Bernie, and one of the differences, of course, between Hillary and Bernie is that he wants to reinstate Glass-Steagall, and she does not. Would you explain for anybody who might be watching right now who doesn't really understand what Glass-Steagall is and why it's so important?
Sure. And let me throw in, I taught economics for 10 years, and I taught my students about Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was a law that Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed that separated depository banks, where you and I have our checking accounts, from insurance companies, from investment banks like Lehman Brothers. And it put up walls so that there could not be cross-ownership and commercial banks could not speculate on Wall Street. That law was repealed in the last year of Bill Clinton's administration under a law called the Financial Modernization Act.
Robert Rubin and those guys.
Yes, yep. And it really set up the collapse in 2008. The interesting thing, and Elizabeth Warren talks about this, while Glass-Steagall was in place, we only had one major bank failure. That was Continental Illinois, and did not lead to a system-wide meltdown. If you look prior to Glass-Steagall, back to the 1800s, about every 8 or 10 years, we had what were called bank panics, where the economy would collapse, it would go into recession, and it's amazing, while Glass-Steagall was on the books, the period from the 30s until 2000 was some of the most stable in our history, and we need to bring it back. Two issues in Iowa. The first is water. We have poison in our water, Marianne. There was just a story this week of a gentleman who is a health nut. His name is Joe Monahan. Joe is in Boone County, Iowa. He and his son were doing gardening in their organic garden this summer. They were drinking out of their garden hose. Turns out that the water contained high levels of nitrates. Joe didn't know. There is a whole set of recriminations now about notification and why he wasn't notified. The water district that he belongs to tried to send out notifications, did not do a good job. And now Joe is asking, did he expose his young son to cancer from those nitrates? And the common cancers, Marianne, are stomach cancer, thyroid cancer, ovarian cancer. And in Iowa, our politicians have a hard time standing up to industrial agriculture and saying enough is enough. And that's an issue that we have to face. And I would propose to do three things if I'm in the United States Senate. The first thing is I would require farmers to have what we would call a clean water plan as part of their receiving federal farm program benefits. They would have to certify the water leaving their farm is free of poisons or they get no federal money. The second thing I would do, Marianne, is I would strengthen the Clean Water Act. Right now, the Clean Water Act has a loophole about that big that says if it runs off a field, it's not considered pollution, but if it runs out of a pipe from a factory, it is. It's called the dispersed source solution. We need to fix that. The last thing I would do is there's a law called FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. It gives chemical manufacturers almost complete immunity from people being poisoned. I think we need to flip FIFRA so that there's strict liability. That if you poison somebody, you poison their water, you're strictly liable. You don't get to skate. Those are the three things on clean water. The other thing in Iowa is local foods. More and more young people want to know who's growing their food, how they're growing their food. And if I'm on the Senate Ag Committee, the next farm bill is going to emphasize fresh, local food over GMO commodities. The other thing I want to say, I absolutely agree with Bernie, Medicare for all. That's where I was at when we were negotiating in 2009 with Republicans. It's like the Affordable Care Act has done a lot of good, but let's take the next step. Medicare for everyone. Medicare for everyone.
Oh, Tom, I so hope that you make it into the U.S. Senate. And I know that voices like yours and leadership like yours is so absolutely important. And it was an honor to have this opportunity to expose you to this audience. I hope more and more people will share this link. I hope more and more people will become hip to your race and do everything to support you so that you can support not only the people of Iowa, but the people of the United States, and through that, I think, the people of the world. So God bless you, sir, and good luck to you on your campaign. And we will be watching you and doing everything that we can to help you get where you're trying to go.
Thank you, Marianne, and I hope to see you in Washington, D.C. when I'm sworn in.
Thank you. I would love that. God bless you. Hey everybody, I'm happy to introduce you to this next candidate. Her name is Angela Marks. She's running in Washington State District 3. And you know, one of the things we talk about a lot in America today is how we need more women in politics. The House of Representatives was called by our founders the People's House. They thought it would be peopled by farmers and shoemakers and candle makers and so forth. They didn't think it was just going to be lawyers and big business executives and all that kind of thing. So what I love about Angela is not only is she a woman, but maybe because there's a little bit of personal relation here, she's a mother and she's a grandmother. And I think one of the reasons that children are as neglected in certain ways as they are in our society is because not enough women who are mothers and who are standing on the values of being mothers and grandmothers are in Congress. So in addition to all of her other marvelous progressive credentials that she will tell you about and that we're all eager to support, she brings the heart of a mother and the heart of a grandmother, and to me that's a really big thing. Angela Marks, hi, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with us.
Hi, Marianne, and I'm glad to hear that, because on my campaign website, what I wrote there to people was that one of the drivers for me to run for Congress is that I want my grandchildren's grandchildren to have a good quality of life too. The only way to do that is to start today, working on the policies and changing.
And of course, we are evolving as a species to the point where so many of our problems are collective, so many of our problems are global, that we have to mature beyond just thinking in terms of our own children. Our government needs to think in terms of not just my children, but all of the children in this country and obviously all of the children in this world. And I think that women carry that particular torch. So for that reason alone, I'm excited by the values that you state as a mother and as a grandmother. I know that in terms of your political stances, I know that you've endorsed Bernie Sanders, so we know where you stand on that scale of progressivism. You're very impassioned about the environment, about income inequality, and also about money in politics. But I know that you have some specific ideas when it comes to the environment and some ideas that you have for clean energy. You want to tell us about those?
Sure. I have a issues tab on my campaign website which covers.
And let's talk about what your site is. Angie, ANGIE 4 numeral 4 AngieForCongress.com.
Correct. And so what I put at the top of the issues page was science and technology, specifically because I'm thinking that in a region where we haven't really had any replacement for the timber industry, which collapsed in the 1970s and the 1980s. So we're mostly still considered kind of a suburb to Portland, Oregon. A lot of people still go over there to work because the jobs available here in Southwest Washington, we're lacking in decent paying jobs. So they have these things called brownfield sites where you can entice manufacturers in because they don't have to pay the full bore of the land or the buildings that exist, because the EPA has taken over the property as a consequence of the company having a disaster and not being able to pay to correct it. And so I'm thinking that we could entice the manufacturers of the machinery to build wind turbines, solar cell panels, and maybe even Elon Musk with one of his factories for producing his new home battery storage systems.
Okay, now I want to bring up two things about what you just said. One is entice, and one is Elon Musk. Okay, how do you entice these guys? So, please tell me. I hope you will be our congresswoman. How are you, as a congresswoman, going to quote-unquote entice them?
Well, generally speaking, with larger businesses, local communities and states entice them by giving them tax refunds or tax credits. And I think that that's dangerous for the local government because it cuts out revenue they need. A much better enticement is to lower their investment in their capital investment so that they can come and use a site that doesn't cost them, a very small amount to start their business there.
Mm-hmm. And so what's your message for Elon Musk?
Is come to the 3rd District so we can create a clean energy hub to build the machinery to power cleaner energy across the nation.
Sometimes Republicans talk like they're the only ones who have the concept of private-public partnership. And I agree with you. Progressives should be leading that with very cool private-public partnerships. I got that. Now, I know you've been writing a blog for Daily Kos for 12 years, right?
I did. I was the chairman for the local legislative district for the Dean campaign in 2003, 2004. And I found a link to Daily Kos when it first started via the DFA blog. So I joined up, and I've been writing there ever since.
Now, is this the first time that you've actually run for office?
It is. I'm not your general candidate. I never run for local office before. I haven't been a member of a lot of public service committees. I was busy struggling on, low wages to raise 2 kids. And for about 10 years, I've thought about running, but I always told myself, you don't have a college degree, you don't have public service background, you haven't run for office, and you don't have any money. It's just never going to work. Only things have changed. Technology has made a candidacy for an average person who meets the conditions of the Constitution, which is 25 years old and a citizen, to run for Congress now.
Well, and also, we're living at a time when people are really understanding that the undue influence of money on our politics is so sick that we really, there is this revolution of thought going on, and it is pouring into a political revolution, and people want what you're saying. People want to think that the House of Representatives particularly is filled with people who do understand, don't just talk the talk, but actually have an experience of what it's like for the average American who's trying to make it, trying to raise children, and so forth. So talk to us realistically. How are you doing? You've got a Tea Party Republican pretty much who's been in there for about 6 years, serving your district, but before that you had a Democrat for 10 years.
Correct.
Okay, so how winnable is this seat, Angela? How are you doing?
So the history of those last 3 campaigns are we had 3 different Democratic candidates. One raised only $10,000. One raised over $250,000. And all 3 of them ended up with about 40% of the vote because they're relying on traditional forms of campaigning, which is you run it strictly through the local party. They do local coordinated campaign, walk and knocks. And we also have a kind of an interesting district because it's 7 counties and there are 660,000 people, but the central county, Clark County, has 440,000 of those people. So we don't have a television station that broadcasts for Washington State. We get all of our TV out of Portland, Oregon broadcast stations. So TV advertising, we never see very much of that here. Radio, a lot of people don't listen to radio these days. They use CDs for music or Amazon Prime maybe. So I'm going to run a neighbor-to-neighbor campaign. I've an upcoming volunteer project to use an alternate to paying the filing fee for Washington State, and that's to collect 1,740 signatures of registered voters to get on the ballot here. And I'll use that as a jump-off point to encourage more volunteers to come and work not across town or in another county to do walk and knock, but to do walk and knock in their own neighborhoods, the 4 streets that surround them. And I'll ask each person that volunteers to do that to look for somebody in the edges of their neighborhood to continue that into the next neighborhood.
And do you want people who are not even in your state to make some phone calls for you?
I will, but I'll do that later on. I've watched politics since I was 12 years old when I was hypnotized by the Watergate hearings when I was like 12 years old. And as far as I can see, most voters who aren't political people and aren't political junkies, they don't pay attention to anything but the presidential race until maybe 30 days before the campaign primary election happens.
When is your primary?
It starts on July 15th, and we're a mail-in ballot state, so people have 3 weeks to complete their ballot and return it. So my big focus is going to be the months of April, May, and June leading up to that primary election, where most of the money that I'll get in donations, I'll buy yard signs, billboard signs, and really, really work local organizations. Every U.S. House candidate can use the help of nonprofit organizations that are on democratic issues. Ask for their help. They're already spending money on PR. They're already fielding volunteers for campaigns. And if you contact them, they'll be willing to help you.
Right. So the point is, you have a primary July 15th. Your website is Angie4, numeral 4, Angie4Congress.com. You're a true progressive. You have endorsed Bernie Sanders. You feel very strongly about the environment, and you have some really cool, innovative ideas about the development of clean energy. You are really big on all the economic platforms of Bernie Sanders, free college, I assume, for community colleges.
Free tuition.
Free tuition.
Everybody makes that mistake. They say free college, and Bernie Sanders gets attacked for that. It's free tuition.
You still have to pay for books,
a place to
live.
Correct. Yeah, free tuition at public colleges and
At
universities.
public universities. Yeah.
Right. And very strong feelings about getting the money out of politics. You think we ought to have a constitutional amendment?
I do.
Yeah. And federal funding, public funding of federal campaigns?
Federal funding of every campaign.
Oh, wow.
Clear down to local campaigns. Look, the reason it's so terrible is because it's not the first time it's happened. People think, oh, this is the first time the wealthy people have tried to buy the government up. No! That's happened like 4 or 5 times in America's history, and every time it takes a populist movement with somebody running for highest office willing to say, just like Bernie Sanders is saying, we need a country for everybody and not just the wealthy people on the top.
I don't think it's even something that just happened 3 or 4 times. I think in every generation there are those, and that's really built into the DNA of our nation. There are always those forces who would seek to withdraw our commitment to the whole idea of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I'm in total agreement with you that what we need are people in Congress as well as the White House who will stand for the idea of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And
That's
from what
right.
I hear you say and what I see on your website and your other writings, Angela Marks, you are just that kind of person. And you are a woman, and you are a mother, and you are a grandmother, and you've been there, and you've done that, and you know what you're talking about, and you have passion in your heart. From the bottom of my heart, I hope you win your race, and I will do all I can to help make it happen.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All my best. Thank you. Hi, it's an honor to introduce you to our next candidate. Paul Clements is running for the House of Representatives from Michigan, District 6. Fortunately, he does not have a primary. He is the candidate. But who he's running against, you really want to know about this. He's running against Fred Upton. Fred Upton has been called by the LA Times the biggest enemy, the number one enemy of the planet, because Congressman Upton, this is a climate change denier, and yet he chairs the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House of Representatives. If that doesn't motivate you to make sure that Paul Clements wins this seat, I don't know what does. But Paul Clements is not just a run-of-the-mill corporate Democrat either. This is a man who attended Harvard undergrad as on scholarship and has a PhD in economics from Princeton University. So whether it's economic inequality, campaign finance, climate and alternative energy, rebuilding middle class and manufacturing in the United States, Paul Clements is on it. Paul, welcome to the summit. I'm really glad that you're here.
Thanks, Marianne. My pleasure.
Now, Paul, I read something that you wrote, and I went, yes, and you yourself as a PhD in economics have a lot that you can say about this. You yourself are a professor of poli-sci at Western Michigan University. I read somewhere that you said 30 years of free market fundamentalism has, and then you went on to talk about what this has done to our country and also what it has done, what needs to be done now. Talk to us about these 30 years of free market fundamentalism so everybody really understands what that means and what has resulted.
Sure. Well, it actually helps to go back a little further, because after World War II, we had about 35, 40 years where we had really good economic growth, and the workers, the working people, they got a good share of that growth. Maybe 30, 40, 50%. But then, around the time of Ronald Reagan, we started moving in a different direction, and this idea of free market fundamentalism, neoliberalism, that all you need is just a free market, and that's going to raise all the boats. Well, it doesn't. It hasn't worked here, didn't work in Latin America, didn't work in Africa. That what we've seen is that in those countries that have had increasing growth in manufacturing and in other high tech, that you see government working with business, working with labor, to say, how do we build up manufacturing? How do we build up the areas where they're going to be good paying jobs in our national territory? And frankly, our government has neglected that. There's a couple reasons. One is, as I said, that we have this kind of the wrong ideology, which also goes along with the whole greed is good thing that got us the 2008 financial meltdown. But also, we've had our big companies, that used to be here in the United States, now our biggest corporations, the ones that employ the armies of lobbyists and lawyers, they're multinational. They don't care if they make their profits in China or in Mexico or some other place. So they've not done push policy to build up the infrastructure and education and things here in the country. And so that's why, I think our democracy is deeply in trouble, partly because of the economic inequality, partly because of money in politics. And if we want to build a strong, vibrant middle class, we've got to rebuild manufacturing, we've got to rebuild high tech with broad support, and that's going to take a very different approach from what we've had for the last 30 years.
I also think it's really important for people to remember that the years between 1952 and 1960, that main post-war period, the president was a Republican, Dwight Eisenhower. So a lot of the ideas that you're talking about were not, before Reagan, were not considered left-wing. They were considered the center, and this is what they should be considered today. This idea of demonizing government coupled with this exaltation of the market as though the free market is always the answer. And you make such an excellent point. Many of these multinationals have no particular allegiance to the people of the United States, to the workers of the United States, and why should they? So when you have their corporate donations influencing and with an undue influence so much of the policy-making decisions of the U.S. government, because of Citizens United and so forth, what we have is what we have now, which is this real, it's more than toxic. It's really a situation that causes a lot of suffering and unnecessary suffering among the American people, and I think people elsewhere as well. Do you agree?
Well, that's exactly right. And if we look further, we have this ideology that, you hire people in your corporations, in your banks, and it's their job to make the most profit, however they can, legally or sometimes on the edges of legality. So if they can get Congress to write laws that help them get more profit, that's why we've got a tax system that's riddled with tax subsidies and loopholes. We see Citibank literally writing the text that goes into the regulation of Citibank. Yep. And obviously that's not going to work for the majority of people.
That's right, and they bring their lawyers right onto the House floor, as we all know. Well, when we look at this with any level of clarity at all, you can just imagine the huge forces that really, really enjoy having Fred Upton chairing the Committee on Energy and Commerce. So I assume they are giving huge amounts of money, PACs, super PACs, in order to make sure he stays in Congress. Would that be true?
Yeah, I ran last time, and the Koch brothers and some of their friends put up $300,000 against me. You had some kind of National Chemical Association that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars advertising for Fred. And, there's a reason they do that.
Yeah.
It helps their bottom line.
That's right. We should take it as a compliment. What do you need from us? How can we help you?
Well, I want your listeners to know, the people who are watching this, to know that if we want to have American leadership on climate change, that Congressman Fred Upton is the strongest opponent of that in the House of Representatives. But it's not just that. I'm sure that I'm not the only person talking about this, but we need all of us in Congress. If we want to build an economy that works for the people, not just for the very few people at the top, if we want to turn around the economic inequality, if we want to make the investments in education, everything from universal access to good quality preschool, dramatically improved K through 12, we need to have debt-free debt-free public universities. We need a lot more vocational. If we want to be creating the conditions where we can increase manufacturing in our national territory, have the high-tech jobs here in the United States, that we've got to get different people in Congress. Fred Upton is certainly an enemy of these things, and this is something I'm going to push for.
The reason we're doing this summit, Paul, is because I think there are a lot of people who agree with you who have not made, until now, a strong enough connection between that is what I want and I am therefore willing to support these candidates who stand for these things. And sometimes, and one of the reasons we wanted to do the summit is so that people like yourself get exposure around the country. I'm sure people in Michigan know who you are, certainly in your district know who you are, but in terms of the support you need, people all over the country need to know who you are. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and no matter who is elected president, that we have people such as yourself in Congress to either support the values of the president, depending on who's elected, or resist the policies of the president is a big deal. Even now, we have a Democratic president, of course, but he supports the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Your views on this?
Yeah, right now, we see a wave of enthusiasm around the country for real political change. There's a lot of frustration. And some of that frustration, I think, is misdirected into, you know who I'm talking about here. Yeah. But certainly the understanding that our government is not working for the majority of the people. We've not had this degree of understanding of that since I was 20 years old. So we've got a real chance to take this country in a new direction.
But
we know that what I'm talking about and what I bet many of your candidates are talking about, is threatening to the moneyed interests. They're not going to sit still for this.
That's right.
So the basic, our democracy is in trouble.
Yeah.
If that's going to be turned around, it's only going to be turned around by a lot of people getting behind the change, and that's what I need to ask people to help with.
Right. Our economy is at stake, our democracy is at stake, and the health and well-being of our planet and our grandchildren is at stake.
Indeed.
So you heard it here, Paul Clements. He's running for Michigan's 6th District. You can go to his website, clementsforcongress.com, CLEMENTS for Congress.com. And don't just go to the site. Do what you can. Paul, I hope you win. Please keep going. I'm behind you. I think a lot of people will be behind you. And please know how important this run is. And I know I will do everything I can to let people around the country know that we have a shot at replacing someone whose values are so not aligned with progressive ideals with you and your values and your passions and your education and your expertise is everything that we need in the U.S. Congress. And I hope with all my heart that you get there.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. God bless you. That's it for this episode. I hope that you enjoyed these interviews and that you will continue to be with us for this Progressive Online Summit, that you will continue to meet the candidates who can make the difference. We'll help them so they can help us. Thanks.